Hello YouTube. From swimming to football to curling, our own world is filled with numerous sports. But considering the depth of the lore of the Elder Scrolls series, it's no surprise that Tamriel has a couple of sports of its own. And today we're taking a look at them, from the violent sport called Vosball, practiced by the orcs, to the amazing frog races held by the high elves. Today we're covering them all, so let's roll the intro and let's get this video going. Alright, so sports. I'm going to be broad today and not just include physical sports like ball games, but also include other activities that the people of Tamriel consider to be sports, like the aforementioned frog races that the Altmer are holding. They are a seemingly favorite pastime of many Altmer, and while not strictly a sport since there's no physical activity for the high elf participants, they themselves call the frog races a sport, and the Altmer are pretty fanatic about it. They bet on races, and there's a small industry of frog breeders who use special foods, alteration magic and other techniques to make the frogs faster. There doesn't really seem to be a limit as to what you can do with the frogs as long as it's a frog and it's fast. The same actually goes for lizard races in Hammerfell. It's much the same concept, except the tracks are bigger and it's way cooler, as you can see. Right, anyway, in some parts of Hammerfell people take it even more seriously than the High Elves do their frog races, as there's an even bigger betting scene and even some organized crime that apparently gets involved in the lizard racing scene. There are organizations and merchants breeding special race lizards in the lore, some with good reputations, making good fast lizards, and some with bad reputations, making them purposefully slow apparently. Alright, now having covered the absolutely most awesome sports, it's time to talk about some sports that people actually play themselves, you know, put some physical effort in. Well, first of all, we basically know that all around Tamriel we have competitive fighting arenas. These arenas tend to come in all shapes and sizes, some with special rule sets, some are gladiator on gladiator, and some are gladiator against monsters or animals. The tradition seems to have started with the Cyrodiilic empires who spread the tradition of arena fights around the continent. However, blood sports have always been a part of most cultures on Tamriel, so while an established arena system may have in large part come from Imperial culture, there's some evidence of older civilizations having blood sport as well. They may have been organized, and if they were, well, we just don't know about it. That being said, we do know that the Bretons actually have jousting as one of their sports. Jousting is one of the sports which the Breton noble houses and knightly orders practice to compete against one another in peaceful yet competitive activities. Although people obviously sometimes die in accidents, it's not nearly as bloody as full-scale war between noble houses. Now, the jousting that the Bretons actually partake in seems to be a carbon copy of real-world medieval jousting, at least in the way it's portrayed in most popular media. So, two knights riding a horse along a fence in opposite directions and try to joust each other off the horse using long jousting spears and protecting themselves with their shield and armor. Other than that, we don't really know that much about jousting in the Elder Scrolls universe, considering that it's something that was only recently explored by the Elder Scrolls Online's High Elf expansion, and that game's horse riding mechanics don't really allow for jousting by players. So yeah, we don't really know that much about it. That said, we do know of another sport using horses in the Elder Scrolls universe: horse racing. Now, we have precious little lore on actual horse racing. While jousting has recently been added pretty prominently, horse racing doesn't really have a lot of lore to it. It does seem to exist in the lore based on some offhand mentions, but it's never been truly explored in depth. The most likely reason for this is probably similar to the reason for jousting going mostly unexplored, so game mechanics. Horses in the Elder Scrolls games have usually had a single speed and not all that great controls for something like racing. While in the Elder Scrolls Online speed per horse does vary, other factors like horse movement and controls wouldn't allow for particularly good racing in that game either. So it's likely that that is why the developers of the series have probably kept horse racing out of the games and thus likely not creating very robust lore around it in order to not draw attention to the fact that it's missing. Alright, so next up is an original orcish sport called Vosball, which is basically extremely violent dodgeball, and I love it. I once made a video on it already, so for more information about Vosball, be sure to check that video out. But still, not exploring Vosball in this video would be kind of a shame, as it's a really cool sport. So, since I don't like repeating myself, allow me to bring in my YouTube colleague ByrnEtch, who makes amazing Elder Scrolls audiobooks and has done a really large part of the in-game book catalog. So I asked him to come on and read the primary source that we have on Vosball, the lore book The Sport of Clans. So, Mr. ByrnEtch, take it away.
The Sport of Clans. A description of a traditional orcish sport. Vosball has a long and fabled history, going back to the earliest days of the Orzamer people. As the orcs gathered into clans, they developed the concept of Courage Ball. It started not as a sport or recreational pastime, but as a way to test the bravery and resilience of clan warriors. The earliest forms of Vosball utilized a heavy sphere made of wood or metal that was about the size of an orc's head. The novice warrior to be tested stood on the far end of a paced-off court, staring down a battery of veteran warriors, each armed with a Vosball. The veterans would each toss their Vosball in turn, hurling it with as much strength as they could muster. If the novice was still standing after the volley of heavy missiles subsided, they proved their courage and was promoted higher into the warrior ranks. As time went on, the test became an organized sport, with teams competing for honor and recognition among the clans. The heavy metal ball was replaced with a heavy leather ball, and rules and regulations were formalized and agreed to among the participating clans. Today, no gathering of clans is complete without a rousing, multiple-day Vosball contest. Foreign clans hold the current record for ongoing victories, winning the last 7 series of the clans by wide margins. Chief Bazrak of Farron, the Farron's most valuable player, has a particularly nasty and powerful toss he affectionately refers to as the Bone Breaker. While the rules of Vosball are constantly changing, the basic structure of the game remains the same. 2 teams of 6 orcs each, all armed with a sling of free Vosballs, competes to control the enclosed court by rendering their opponents unconscious by hurling the heavy spheres with all of their might. Beyond that, there are dozens of rules and regulations that non-orcs find confusing and contradictory. No matter. Anyone who has ever witnessed the game played in all its glory comes away excited, breathless, and with a renewed understanding of the definition of courage.
Alright, thank you for that nice little audiobook. I can really recommend you guys checking out ByrnEtch's channel. He makes extremely high quality little Elder Scrolls audiobooks for the lore books that we find in the games. Listening to his videos is just such a fun experience, and you can learn a lot about the primary sources of Elder Scrolls lore that way, so please give him a visit. I will promise that you will not be disappointed. A link to his channel and some of his best work is in the top of the description. Alright, let's talk about some more sports now, because we have some Argonian sports coming up. We know that the Argonians have at least 3 sports, and they are called Tiba Inu, Tiba Basu and Tiba Hatsai. Now, I have covered Tiba Hatsai in a past separate video where I explained some more of the rules, so I recommend you watch that for more in-depth information. But in short, Tiba Hatsai directly translates to hip and tail ball. It's a sport where Argonians are only allowed to touch the ball with their hips, tails and elbows. Any other limbs touching the ball is not allowed. Because of this, Argonians with bigger and broader tails are usually among the best players of the game. The game itself is played on a large muddy field by 2 teams of 5 Argonians, with a wall on each side of the field and hoops suspended over the field. When a ball is tossed up, players can use their tails and hips and elbows to pass to other players and try to hit the opposing side's wall. When the ball is hit, they get a point. They can get more points depending on the circumstances of the hit. For example, hitting the wall after sending the ball through a hoop gets you 3 points, a hit on the wall while at range gets you 2 points, and the game is ended either when one team has 10 points or if a specific hoop over the field is hit. It's a pretty hard sport, as the balls that are used are heavy, and getting hit by the balls is not a particularly fun time, so weaker Argonians and outsiders usually use protective padded armor or special lighter balls. I made a video explaining the game in more depth, plus the similarities to a certain Mayan game in that video that you see on screen, which can be found in the description for more information, so consider watching that after this if you want to know more about hip and tail ball. Because here we have even more Argonian sports to cover. First of all, Tiba Inu, which is a game that is also played with a ball, but nobody really understands the rules properly, or at least nobody that's not an Argonian, because it's partially a sport and partially an Argonian ritual, for which the rules are extremely convoluted and unclear. No Argonian has ever read the rules for it, and yet they just seem to know the rules instinctively. While outsiders observing it cannot seem to make sense of it, no matter how hard the Argonians try to explain it, a Breton who once tried to document the rules descended into madness while trying. To give a little bit of an idea of what the game plays like, Argonians in seemingly random order lay down in the mud, slap their tails, kick many balls towards the other team at the same time. They randomly do war cries, which seem to be a part of the game and not just provocation for the other team. They sing as part of the game, and sometimes they completely ignore the balls and just roll around in the mud with the other team, and that somehow gets them points. It's not for us to understand, I think. It's just a strange game. Now, the final Argonian game that we know of is called Tiba Basu, which seems to be a form of tennis or racquetball, as it uses smaller balls and rackets. But that's basically all we know. There's really no more lore on it except that bit. And that goes for most of the other sports in this video as well, because there are now a few more sports to be covered. None of them have a lot of lore to them, but some do call to the imagination and have parallels to sports existing in our own world. So, first of all, we know that the Nords, and presumably other races as well who live closer to rivers, race rowboats down the rivers, both solo and in teams. You also have Mammoth Ball, which is a game that the Nords tend to play. We know nothing about it other than that it's played with a grapefruit-sized ball made out of mammoth leather, which still has the mammoth hair on it. The long hairs of the ball may have gameplay purposes, but if it doesn't, then I don't know why you would keep the hair, to be honest, but it's not for us to know because there's not much lore on it. We know that the Red Guards play a form of bowling. We know that the Khajiit have a game called Spike Ball, played with spiked balls, which they take quite seriously apparently. There's also several water-based sports, not specifically tied to any race or culture, which uses a discus. And we have the Orcish game called Gulob, which is an extremely violent game played with sticks, presumably to hit each other, but we don't know, unfortunately. You see, of all those sports, we know that they exist, but we know very little else about them, since we only have 1 or 2 lines of lore on them, and usually therefore we only know the name of the sport and maybe 1 or 2 characteristics. Just like with Tamriel's board, dice and card games, on which we also know a lot of games, but we know the rules to only a very few. I made a video on that as well, and you'll see there that there's a few board, dice, card games that we know rules to, just like with sports, but most of them we just know the name. But, you know, just in case you want to continue watching more of my videos, check out that link in the description. And if you're sick of my voice or want to watch some actual quality content for once, check out ByrnEtch's Elder Scrolls audiobooks. A link to his channel is in the description. Please check him out. Again, he does really cool work and he's really underrated, so check out the link in the description. Anyway, I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did and you learned something new about the Elder Scrolls lore today, then consider subscribing to my channel and returning for the next Elder Scrolls lore video, probably next week. And definitely please consider subscribing to ByrnEtch's channel, he does really cool stuff. Again, link in the description. Now, all that remains for me to be done is to thank my top Patreon supporters, Mr. Bernardo Minna, Gabriel Binna, Polar Rasputin, Athena Hyodis, Dragonborn of Nerevar, Volcure of Argonia, King Chris, Bulge, Scrap of the Scrolls, Doji, Fenrir, Sword of Bushido, Rakai, and Mr. Christmas. It's thanks to all these people and the people on screen that this channel stays alive, and for that I'm very grateful. That said, I hope to see all of you in the next Elder Scrolls lore video. Bye bye.